Hi, this is a brief talk called Robespierre's End. Speaking historically, once a person has embraced a revolution, it's been devilishly difficult to walk away. Revolutions have a way of tracking down folks who've decided to pull back, of punishing those who are on the losing side, even if they've since given up politics. Revolutions have terrible retirement packages. They have even worse severance packages. The French Revolution was littered with the corpses of politicians and activists whose moment had passed, those who had stepped back from public life only to find themselves getting a special haircut from the national razor. Jean-Sylvain Bailly, the first president of the National Assembly, the first mayor of revolutionary Paris, had retired from political life after 1791. He was guillotined in 1793 for once declaring martial law in Paris. Olympe de Gouges, who wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and Citizen, was killed after being accused of royalist sympathies. Madame Roland was executed for having been a key organizer of the Girondins in the National Convention, though she was no deputy herself. Antoine Barnave, a leader in the early revolution, found that retirement to his home province was no protection. He was brought back to Paris in 1793 and guillotined as a royalist and traitor. Radical politicians fared no better. Georges Danton took time off politics in the National Convention in the winter of 1793-1794 to enjoy his newfound wealth and spend time with his young wife. When he returned to the convention early in 1794, he found the situation so changed that he could not save his own life, let alone the lives of his allies. At the height of the revolution, even corpses were not safe from punishment. The Count of Mirabeau, a great orator and major figure in the early revolution, had his body disinterred from the Panthéon, where the heroes of the revolution were buried, and unceremoniously dumped into a mass grave. The churn of public figures at the helm of the revolution had intensified and sped up between 1789 and 1793, before almost freezing during the great year 2 of the revolution, the period between 1793 September and the end of July in 1794. During that 10 months, France was ruled by its National Convention, and the convention was dominated by the committees of public safety and general security. It was the first time in the revolution that the nation had a real government, a fairly unified group of men who set policy and saw it through to execution. The committees oversaw the executive branch while at the same time proposing decrees to the convention. Their remit was vast. The Committee of Public Safety was to see France through the war to victory while maintaining the national economy so the people survived and the army was fed. The Committee of General Security acted as a kind of political police, making sure that the domestic enemies of the nation did not thwart the revolution. Not surprisingly, the great committees tried to undermine their rivals to power. In September and October of 1793, while the Girondin deputies, Marie Antoinette, and various figures from the old regime and the early revolution were tried and had their rendezvous with Madame Guillotine, the far-left group known as the Enragés was broken up. In the winter of 1794, the network of radicals grouped around the journalist Jacques Hébert was smashed, its leaders accused of being too revolutionary and bringing the revolution in dispute, thus obviously being in the pay of foreign enemies to the Republic. Soon after, in March 1794, the moderate deputies grouped around Georges Danton met the same fate. The Committee of Public Safety had destroyed the groups that most threatened its hold on power. That spring, the French army had victory after victory, and it appeared that the revolution was safe at last. But safe for whom? The destruction of the Hébertists and the Dantonists had not been terribly thorough, and many of their former allies still sat in the National Convention. Men who had spread terror throughout much of the country, putting down revolts, had seen some of their allies denounced and executed. Similarly, men who had hoped for a toning down of the emergency powers of the government and a return to constitutional rule had watched their leaders killed. Men on the committees themselves had strong ties to those who'd been convicted of financial and political crimes and feared that they too might fall. As spring turned to summer in 1794, a sense of paranoia and anxiety overwhelmed the men who had sought to steer France through its crisis. In June of 1794, Georges Couthon and Maximilien Robespierre brought a new law to the convention, called the Law of Prairial, after the month on the revolutionary calendar during which it was proposed. The new law reorganized the Revolutionary Tribunal, taking away legal safeguards of all kinds, turning it into a tool to annihilate traitors, those accused of political crimes. One can forgive some of the deputies for thinking this new law was aimed at them, too. In one of the more remarkable episodes in an already remarkable period of time, Robespierre fell ill, or fell out of sorts at the very least, and at the end of June stopped attending the meetings of the Committee of Public Safety. In many ways, he'd been the face of the committee, though he was in no sense its leader. The body worked by consensus among those who were at the table during its nightly meetings, and it sent its members out on missions, to the army, to the navy, wherever they were needed to solve major problems. Robespierre was, though, one of the committee's best speakers, and he had a great following in Paris and in the Jacobin network nationwide. He was seen as a man of great virtue, incapable of being bribed or intimidated. His entire political career had come out of his ability to make people understand that he actually believed what he preached, and that he would practice it himself. What he wanted was an end to conspiracy, an end to falsehood. He wanted a republic that would allow men to live good and virtuous lives. He was not, however, a fanatic. He understood that not everyone had the same standards he did. He encouraged his political allies to save good men who had merely been misled, and punish only those who caused trouble out of their own wickedness. The problem was that in the heat of events, it was very difficult to tell who was wicked and who was misled. In mid-June of 1794, members of the Committee of General Security, who worried Robespierre might come after them next, denounced an eccentric old woman who claimed to be a religious prophet, stating that she and her followers were counter-revolutionaries. They tried to link Robespierre to this group, claiming that she had declared Robespierre was God. Robespierre easily parried the blow, which made his enemies fear him even more. At the end of the month, Robespierre was confronted by his more radical colleagues on the Committee of Public Safety, Collot and Billaud-Varenne, though in truth we don't know why. Infuriated by their taunts and threats, Robespierre stopped attending meetings of the committee. Instead, he went to the Jacobin Club and gave his speeches there. As the law of Prairial began to bite, with more executions in Paris in June and July than in the rest of the year too combined, Robespierre went almost on vacation. Why? Historians disagree. Was he ill? Was he overcome with stress and anxiety? Had he simply lost his political touch and let the moment for vigorous, decisive action pass? We don't know. We do know that in this month, from the end of June to the end of July, as he sat on the sidelines, his enemies plotted against him. They did not know what he was up to, but deputies on the left and right of the assembly feared that he was working up another purge, and that they might be on the list of those to be proscribed. Matters came to a head when Saint-Just, long Robespierre's ally on the Committee of Public Safety, tried to work out a compromise between Robespierre and the members of the two ruling committees. The compromise blew up because Robespierre seemed not to want it. Robespierre went to the convention on the 26th of July to give a speech, letting everyone know what he was thinking. In a long, rambling, and yet elegant speech, Robespierre said that there were still plotters among the deputies who needed to be purged. He did not, however, name names. When the convention refused to print his speech and send it out to the provinces showing its approval, Robespierre took the speech to the Jacobin Club and read it there, where it was much better received. His rivals on the committee, Collot and Billaud, were there that night, and they were driven out of the club, accused of being plotters. This was the moment that sealed Robespierre's fate. Those two men went immediately to the Committee of Public Safety and declared that Robespierre must be stopped. Saint-Just was caught off guard. He said he'd investigate the matter and make a speech at the convention the next day. Once he left the meeting, the rest of the committee members set about arranging for Robespierre's arrest. On the 27th of July, 9 Thermidor, by the revolutionary calendar, Saint-Just tried to give his speech in which he sought reconciliation between Robespierre and the rest of the committee. He was shouted down. Robespierre was denied the opportunity to speak. the convention voted for Robespierre's arrest. His younger brother, Augustin, outraged, demanded to be arrested as well. Couthon, Saint-Just, and Saint-Just's friend Labat were all arrested. And what happens next defies description. The jailers of Paris refused to take the prisoners in, and the 5 of them found their way to City Hall, where they attempted a new insurrection against the convention. Their attempt failed. They were unable to rally the forces of Paris against the convention, and in the morning, when forces loyal to the convention arrived, there was no one there to protect Robespierre and his friends. The 5 men had been declared outlaws. When they were arrested, they were simply identified before the Revolutionary Tribunal and sent to the guillotine without trial. Deputies from the far left and the far right of the convention had come to agree on one thing and one thing only. Robespierre and his allies were a threat to their lives. The convention had once again purged itself in the name of saving the revolution. It would not be the last time.